believe that we adopted that as the basis for citizenship in this newly formed republic, which was based upon the consent of the governed. I don't think so. It doesn't make any sense. We believe that citizenship is now based upon consent, and that legitimate government is the just powers of government. Legitimate government proceeds from the consent of the government. Consent now is the basis of citizenship, not the accident of birth. You solely, you know, you're born here, therefore you owe perpetual allegiance. The first number of the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton said, this is the time in which a people is going to decide whether governments rest upon accident and force, or whether we can choose government based upon, accident and force, or whether we can choose government based upon deliberation and choice. Now, the accident of birth, which is the British system, the British common law system, is going to be replaced by the consent of the governed, which is on the side of deliberation and choice. Deliberation and choice implies natural right, right? Let me fast forward now to and by the way, Madison also said this. He said, there is in America, in the common law, nothing survives in the common law that's contrary to the principles of the Revolution, meaning the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And it's clear that the Declaration rejected birthright subjectship in the way in which we dissolved our allegiance to the British crown. So that didn't survive the principles of the Revolution. That's very clear. And those passages that Mr. Anton read to you from Madison's writings on compact second that notion. Now let me talk to you a little bit about the 14th Amendment. Did it adopt the British common law of birthright subjectship? Of course it did not. Now, the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment was introduced very, very late in the debate about the 14th Amendment, almost at the last moment. The Privileges and Immunities Clause was already in the 14th Amendment, which says that the privileges and immunities of United States citizens cannot be denied. And so Benjamin Wade, a senator from Illinois, raised an objection from the floor of the Senate and said, well, we're protecting the privileges and immunities of United States citizens. We ought to have a definition of who are United States citizens. It only makes sense. And he suggested that we ought to say United States citizens are all persons born or naturalized in the United States. And that question was taken up by the Joint Committee on Reconstruction, and they came back a couple weeks later and said, we suggest that the definition of United States citizenship should be all persons born or naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. So the Committee on Reconstruction added and subject to the jurisdiction. So two requirements now. Born or naturalized in the United States, very important, but they also have to be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Two requirements. That means not all persons born in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. That's interesting. So what does it mean to be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? Again, I'm glad you asked, because I have the answer. A lot of debate about this. Today, our progressive liberal friends, including many, many people who should know better, say that everyone who is born within the geographical limits of the United States are automatically subject to the jurisdiction of the United States because they are subject to the laws and to the courts of the United States. That's wrong. Why is it wrong? Because you've simply rendered the jurisdiction clause superfluous without force or effect, right? If everybody who is born here is automatically subject to the jurisdiction, then you've rendered the jurisdiction clause meaningless. If that's what the framers of the 14th Amendment had meant, they would have left out the jurisdiction clause. Everybody get that point? Of course. And what is it that a good constitutional scholar knows? If you're going to be an original intent jurisprudent, you know that every part of the Constitution has to have meaning. You cannot interpret the Constitution in a way that leaves some Constitution without force or effect. Some part of the Constitution without force or effect. So we have to find some meaning to the jurisdiction clause. Well, what did the framers say? They said, subject to the jurisdiction means owing allegiance to the United States. Subject to the complete jurisdiction of the United States, meaning owing allegiance to no other country. Owing complete allegiance to the United States. Not subject to any foreign nation. That's what they said. And they said it over and over and over again. Now, it's a fair question. If they meant by subject to the jurisdiction, if they meant not owing allegiance, why didn't they put in allegiance instead of jurisdiction? Yeah? That's a fair question. Many people have asked that, and I have the answer. Because it's the answer that the framers of the 14th Amendment gave. Now, Senator Trumbull, who was a senator from Illinois, chairman of the powerful Judiciary Committee at the time, in 1866, he was also the author of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which had passed only 5 weeks prior to this debate about the 14th Amendment, about the citizenship clause in the 14th Amendment. The Civil Rights Act had been passed over the veto of President Johnson, and that means that it was passed by a 2/3 majority in both houses of the Congress. And these were the same people that passed the 14th Amendment in both houses of the Congress. Now, what Senator Trumbull had said was that we were going to put into the language of the Civil Rights Act allegiance, that all persons born or naturalized and subject and owing allegiance to the United States were citizens. And then we remembered that the word allegiance was a term of art under the common law, under the British common law. It was a term of art.